First in just one election. After 10 years of Liberals and New Democrats at Queen's Park, Harris campaigned on the need for what he called a common sense revolution in Ontario. And observers predicted that by the time he was done, not one blade of grass in front of Queen's Park would fail to be trampled upon by some protester. They were right. And Ontario's 22nd Premier joins us now from Midtown Toronto. Mr. Harris, it's good to see you again. How are you managing through this pandemic?
Well, Steve, as well as can be expected, like everybody else, we're working from home.
Well, we're glad you could spare some time for us tonight. And I do want to go back to 25 years ago because, of course, many people watching us right now either didn't live in Ontario or may not even have been alive. So we need to tell a bit of the story here. What was going on in the province at that time that made you think we needed a so-called common sense revolution?
Well, we'd had 10 years of kind of Liberal NDP together and separate government. And a buildup of significant annual deficits and a buildup of debt. And it was our belief that this wasn't sustainable. So, in a number of areas in education that was just okay, and healthcare that was just okay, a lot of things that we felt needed to be done. Infrastructure we felt falling behind at the same time as an $11 billion annual deficit. So we felt it was time for a significant change. And if we thought it was just common sense, and I think once people heard it and understood it, I think they thought it was just common sense too. And yet it was kind of revolutionary. For example, we said we were going to cut tax rates. And that would produce more jobs and, in fact, more revenue for the government. That was counterintuitive. So in that sense, it was kind of revolutionary. We said we were going to unlegislate. We felt we needed a rebalancing of labor legislation. Nobody had unlegislated before. That was a no-no. And so that was kind of revolutionary. And some smart fellows sitting around the table came up with, let's call it a common sense revolution, and that became the name of it. And let's face it, it was a campaign slogan, if you like, but it did describe, I think, relatively accurately what we felt needed to be done.
It was actually a year before that 1995 election that you brought out the Common Sense Revolution document. And I'll ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, just to roll some pictures, because you came into this very studio in 1994. There's Mike Harris, a slightly younger fella, on a show called Studio 2, where you and I talked about your Common Sense Revolution plans. Oh my God, look at that fella. Well, but during the course of that interview, here is how you described the mission at hand. Sheldon, if you would, let's roll that clip.
What's changed is we've had 10 years, the period we call the lost decade, of some 65 new tax increases, massive buildup in government spending, a significant intervention by government into the marketplace. And so what needs to happen now is to restore the balance that Bill Davis had throughout that period of time. We do need a correction from this politics of the past 10 years. We need major change to get Ontario back on track.
You know, it's interesting. You referenced Bill Davis there, who, of course, was premier in the 1970s and 1980s. And you know, many people found it unusual that you would compare yourself to being a Bill Davis conservative because, of course, they think you're way more right-wing than he was. So help us figure that out, if you would.
Well, listen, I got into politics because of Bill Davis. I admire him. I still do. I think he had generally the right balance, if you like, between government and the private sector. And I felt that had moved significantly. I don't like right wing and left wing, but let's say had moved significantly to the left, to bigger government, to more government, to more intervention into the private sector. And so, while compared to the NDP and Bob Regg government that I was wanted to replace, you could say I was right of them. And Bill Davis was considered moderate and in the middle. I felt I was just restoring the Ontario government back to the middle, and it had moved too far left. So that was, part of the analogy. And I admired Bill Davis. I thought he was a man of great principle. and stood by what he believed in, and used a lot of common sense, was practical. He wasn't dogmatic. I know people felt I was more dogmatic or more right-wing than him. I didn't believe so.
Here is what you did when you came into power 25 years ago, and you did this almost immediately, and we'll bring this graphic up and I'll read along for those listening on podcast. There were spending cuts, as you indicated, almost right away, $2 billion. You canceled photo radar, which was a very controversial item the NDP had brought in. You canceled it. You cut welfare payments by 21%, but nevertheless, that left them about 10% above the national average. You repealed the previous Regg government's anti-strikebreaker legislation, known as Bill 40. You very famously cut provincial income taxes by 30%. And then as time went on, you sustained a political protest by more than 100,000 teachers who protested your education reforms. And of course, further down the road, you created the so-called megacity, the new city of Toronto, a form of government which still exists to this day. What do you think was the overall philosophy that those policy choices reflected?
Well, the education was one where we felt there were significant changes that were required to bring Ontario curriculum into the 21st century, if you like. We eliminated grade 13. This brought us into sync with 50 states and all the rest of the provinces. We were behind in math and science, and there were significant, it was made tougher, if you like, in that area. But that education is a key part of success for jobs and for growth and for businesses to succeed. And a big part of our agenda was growing the private sector. We felt we had too much government, not enough private sector to sustain it. Re-regulating, the same thing. The welfare. We had moved welfare payments in Ontario to an average of about 50% higher than all the rest of the average of the rest of the provinces. And it became better for, if you like, or more financially rewarding to stay on welfare than go to work. And so we wanted to boost the private sector. We wanted to boost the jobs and opportunities, but at the same time, we didn't want people to, we wanted to break that cycle of dependency, if you like, on the state, on welfare. And it was controversial, but hugely successful. If you look at, I don't know, some 700,000 off the welfare rolls, something like that, or 500,000 or 600,000 off the welfare rolls and into productive jobs and away from dependence and into into freedom, into being the dignity of a job, we used to call it. So it was all part of what we felt needed to be done to get Ontario back on track.
I wanted to ask you a bit about your style of leadership, because I remember talking to a teacher union leader at the time who said every time a previous premier tried to bring in some kind of education reform we didn't like, we'd put thousands of teachers in the streets, we'd holler and holler, we'd march up and down whatever street it was, and then they'd back down a bit, put some water in their wine, and we'd find a happy place. And I remember him saying to me, this guy doesn't do that. This guy isn't going to compromise at all. How come you didn't?
We'd spent, well, you know what? I was a teacher. I was a trustee. I was a school board chair. I was involved provincially. I think I understood what needed to be done. I had been in opposition for 10 years. I had been leader for 5 years, traveling the province, listening. By the way, I had substantial teacher support for my election. As you know, they ended up against David Peterson. They ended up against Bob Ray. They ended up eventually against me. They didn't like any change that they didn't think, benefited them. And I understand that. That's what unions do. They put their membership first, quite frankly. And it was my job to put students first and to put families first. We felt we were on the right track. We campaigned, on significant change. And, by the way, a lot of those changes we made in education are still in place today. And I think we've been proven right. Was it perfect? No. Did we make some mistakes along the way? I'm sure we did. Did we go a little too fast, a little too slow? That happens. When you're implementing change. But by and large, I think we moved in the right direction. And I think in the end, the public understood it. By the way, I've run into lots of teachers who have said to me, we understand a little better today, what you were trying to do and what you did, and we're not so opposed to everything you stood for.
Well, you won't be surprised to hear that I do want to talk about some of the mistakes from 25 years ago. And mind you, I'll set it up this way. The slogan on your government was, in those mid to late 1990s, he did what he said he was going to do. And as far as what you campaigned on in the Common Sense Revolution, that was true. And in fact, when you went for re-election in 1999, you won a second consecutive majority, which hadn't been done in 3 decades. And with a slightly higher percentage of the total votes cast as well. However, the knock on you was that when stuff came up that you had not campaigned on or planned on, your government didn't react as well. And I'm thinking here of, for example, the tragedy of the 6 deaths in Walkerton from tainted water. I'm thinking of Ipperwash, where a protester was killed. Do you think, with the benefit of 25 years of hindsight, that that's a fair knock on your government, that you didn't handle the stuff that came up as well as the stuff you planned?
I don't think in the 2 cases you bring up. I mean, I think Walkerton was a tragedy. I was premier at the time. I'm not sure there was, quite frankly, anything that our government did that precipitated that. Dudley George was an unfortunate tragedy. The only action our government took was we sought an injunction, and it happened under my watch, and obviously I regret that both of those things happened. But in hindsight, was there something that I could have done different, or our government could have done different? I'm not so sure. That would have prevented those. The mega city is brought up by a lot of people, if you like, the amalgamation. We didn't campaign on that. We did campaign on, if there's a better way to do things, we'd like to hear about that. And it wasn't handled quite as smoothly as some things that we did. And on the other hand, particularly in the case of Toronto, I felt it was important that we needed a world-class city, and to have a world-class city, you needed some scale and you needed some size. And I also felt that the city of Toronto unfairly was taking on the burden of a lot of social costs that the surrounding municipalities did not have, and I just think it made sense. And when I traveled the world after taking over and financial centers and whatnot, everybody had heard of Canada, everybody had heard of Toronto. Nobody knew what Ontario was. And you need world-class cities. Quite frankly, at least I felt you did, and I still feel you do. To be successful. And I think Toronto, by and large, has been a success. Some of the other amalgamations were challenging, and I think we made some mistakes there, maybe too quickly, maybe too much. Not everything worked out, but you know what? Generally, I suppose it's a fair knock on things that we didn't campaign on, because those were things we didn't have 5 years to plan and figure out how to do.
I want to ask you more about your brand of conservatism, in as much as I think it's fair to say that when a Conservative Party takes over, either federally or at Queen's Park, social conservatives think they have an ally in that person. And I also think it's fair to say that you left a lot of social conservatives very disappointed because you didn't recriminalize abortion or attempt to do that. And when the courts decided that dozens and dozens of Ontario laws had to come into compliance with a ruling that gave same-sex partners additional rights, you did it. You didn't appeal the decision, you just went along with it. How come?
Well, I'm a big believer that religion, if you like, which drives a lot of these thoughts on abortion and on gay rights and marriage and whatnot, I don't think they belong in politics. I don't think that's why we elect governments. We leave that to churches, we leave that to individuals, we leave those decisions and in the hands of others and of individuals. So it didn't make sense to me that that's why we were elected. We were elected to provide those things that people can't provide for themselves, and healthcare and education and social programs and safety and in those areas. So and those were things that were divided people. And I had spent a considerable amount of time with my party and with my caucus. Not everybody jumped on board right away with that philosophy, but I said, look, here's things that unite us. Here's things that we were elected to do. And by and large, I had unanimity amongst the caucus, and I was pretty proud of that. Even back in the day, same-sex benefits was we're going back 30 years, 35 years. David Pearson promised to bring it in, had a massive majority of government, couldn't get it through his caucus. The NDP, Bob Ray promised to bring it in, had a majority, couldn't get it through his caucus. So I maybe the timing was better for us, but I was pretty proud of the fact that we had unanimity in that. And part of that, goes back to, when I was newly elected, I was chairing a Natural Resources Committee, and Bob Elgie had a controversial bill that was brought gay rights into the, covered under the Human Rights Code.
Yes.
Yeah, that was very controversial at the time. And they sent that bill to my committee, not a natural committee for human rights legislation. But, we got that through, and it's just been, my philosophy.
I do want to take advantage of your being here to bring you a little bit fast forward and talk about some current events, because as strange as it sounds, you've been out of politics for almost 2 decades now, and the only Conservative Party leader to win an election since you is the guy who currently has the job, and that's Doug Ford. And unlike you, who had a great deal of experience before becoming Premier, Mr. Ford had none. He had no experience in provincial politics before becoming Premier. In your view, and I know you've advised him behind the scenes a little bit, in your view, how ill-prepared was he for the job he eventually got 2 years ago this month?
Well, he wasn't well prepared. He certainly wasn't as well prepared as I was, because I'd had time in government, I'd had time in opposition, I had 5 years to plan. Some, I remember, criticized him and said, you don't seem to be as well prepared as Mike Harris was. Well, how could he have been? 5 or 6 months before the election, he was running for mayor. He had no provincial experience. So he was still, learning things on the fly, if you like, and a large part of his government was as well. So I don't think it's a fair comparison to the amount of planning that I had. But let me say this, while he had a challenging start, he's performed amazingly well, and he's a quick learner, and he's demonstrated a kind of empathy and balance throughout this COVID situation, and he's learned from any mistakes that he's made. And I think he's facing far greater challenges today than I felt, and I think by and large he's handling it very, very well.
Well, I should ask you about COVID as well, because as has been reported, you are the chair of one of the biggest long-term care home providers in the province of Ontario. And you know that the New Democrats have said that the lesson of COVID-19 is that we really shouldn't have any more private owners or operators of long-term care homes in the province going forward, that they should be all part of the continuum of care that our healthcare system provides. And I should give you a chance to comment on that. What's your view on it?
Well, the NDP want government to provide everything. That's socialism at its best. And it's an ideology that they have that anywhere around the world it's been tried, doesn't work very well. The big problem in long-term care in Ontario, and it is a problem, and it's been a problem for many, many years. We're short of spaces. We have older homes that should have been rebuilt over the last 15 years, 16 years, have not been rebuilt. We had a significant backlog when I came into office. We built, our commitment was 20,000 new beds. We built those. They're all modern. Those homes, whether private or not-for-profit, have done relatively well. But the older homes have not done very well, whether they're in the hands of the private sector or in the hands of the nonprofits. Quite frankly, there's really not much profit. And in fact, and I would argue there's no profit in long-term care. Chartwell has about 10 or 11% of our residences are long-term care. The rest are retirement residences. 100% of the money we get from the government is spent on the services, but there's not enough money. And there hasn't been for the last 15 years, I would say. There's still 30,000. I think we rebuilt about 17,000 beds when we were in government from the old, four-bed wards, the narrow hallways and whatnot, those ones. There's still 30,000 that should have continued to been built. Again, whether they're private sector or whether they're nonprofit, and that wasn't done. Secondly, I think it's obvious that governments were ill prepared for this pandemic and ill prepared to deal with it in long-term care. And you're starting to see some of the analysis now of lack of personal protection equipment and whatnot. But I don't think the issue is whether it's how it's incorporated. I think the issue is one more of preparedness, of being ready. Quite frankly, some of the larger for-profit, if you like to call them, have had economies of scale. Chartwell, for example, early on when we couldn't get PPE from federal or provincial governments, we were sourcing it ourselves. We helped a number of the nonprofits who had no clout and had no resources. We helped them as well with personal protection equipment and at the same time. But you know what? I agree with Doug Ford that the system needs a complete overhaul, and part of it is a significant lack of funding.
We're down to our last minute here, and I want to ask you one last thing. Even though you've been out of public life for almost 2 decades now, your name gets raised at Queen's Park all the time. You still are an amazingly polarizing person. Why do you think that is?
Well, we brought about a lot of change. I think the change we brought about was positive. So either positively or negatively for some reason or other. I guess on the negative side, it's usually the NDP or Liberals bring me up. I wear it, I guess, as a badge of honor. I'm proud of my time in office. Were we perfect? No. But we did do what we said we would do, and by and large, we took I call it the trifecta of taking $11 billion deficit, turning it into a surplus, at the same time as we cut tax rates, at the same time as we created hundreds of thousands of new jobs. That was an important trifecta that gave Ontario the resources to be able to invest massively into, the first subway system that had been done in 25 years, into the arts, into new hospitals, into the biggest expansion of colleges and universities there. Those dollars came in because we got the private sector booming. And even at lower tax rates, we got substantially more dollars in. That's an impressive trifecta, I believe. And it's a lesson for future government.
Mr. Harris, thanks for spending some of this 25th anniversary with us here on TVO tonight. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Now that we've heard from the man who led the common sense revolution, let's get a more analytical view on the Mike Harris legacy. And to do that, we welcome, in East York, Ontario, Christina Blizzard, author of Right Turn, How the Tories Took Ontario. It's all about the Harris years. And of course, she was a longtime columnist for Sun Media. And in Midtown Toronto, there's Martin Regg, Ontario politics columnist with the Toronto Star. And it's great to have you two wise observers on our program tonight. I want to start with this premise that Mike Harris put forward, which is essentially, I'm not too right-wing. The province had gone too far left-wing after 10 years of Liberals and New Democrats, and all I did was drag it into the middle. Christina Blizzard, weigh in on that. What do you think?
Well, I think there is a lot to be said for that. I think you also have to remember that Bob Ray, who was then a New Democrat, who was Mike Harris's predecessor, had governed through a double dip recession. The province was in a terrible financial situation. I think that Ray, in his own memoirs, recalled that they'd almost considered declaring bankruptcy. So Harris came in that year and had to make some, very deep cuts because, just because Ray had tried to sort of spend his way out of these recessions. So I think in a great many ways that is true. But I do think in a lot of ways Harris made some very bold changes to education funding, for example. So there's a little bit of both in that.
Yes, we'll go through the list of some of the either the hits or misses as you guys see them. Martin, what about that original notion that he actually wasn't as right-wing as people thought? He really just wanted to bring the province back more to what he saw as the middle of the road.
Well, governing is like driving. There are always course corrections, and he was a product of his times. I was struck by something that Chris said, though, a moment ago about how Ray tried to spend his way out of the recession, which has a familiar ring today, given that another progressive conservative premier, Doug Ford, is also trying to spend his way out of an economic crisis, as is every government on the planet. So my point is that Bob Ray was in power for a recession, and so the budget, the books were under tremendous stress. And Mike Harris profited from that by being able to say, hey, I can bring order to the books. I can bring balance. I can put us back into harmony. But if there was a course correction, it wasn't to the center. It was to the right wing.
You think it was a much more hard right-wing government than he's letting on?
Well, I think it was absolutely a product of its times in the wake of Ronald Reagan and Thatcherism. And absolutely, I mean, Mike Harris couldn't get elected today, no matter how charming, persuasive, charismatic he might be, because at that time, people believed the government was not its friend. As the old Republican joke goes in the U.S., Ronald Reagan, in fact, hi, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help you. And that was a laugh line. Try that today and people won't laugh. They'll say, please help me.
Right. Christina, he did manage to cut taxes, which is what he said he would do. In cutting taxes, he actually realized more revenue. They did balance the budget as well. The question was it his policies that made that happen, or was he just lucky enough to be the guy with his hand on the tiller at a time when the world economy was returning after that awful recession of the 1990s?
Well, I suspect it's a bit of both. I mean, I think that the province really needed some, economic stimulation. There were, as we've just commented, I think that Mike Harris was a great pragmatist, and more than being ideological, I think he was a pragmatist. Don't forget, the first thing he did when he came to power was to cancel photo radar, which had been hugely unpopular in the province, far more so than anything else. I suspect that some of his policies were simply dealing with things that irritated voters, taxpayers, whatever. The little sort of niggly things that just drove people crazy about government. Such as photo radar,
Sure.
yeah.
No, that was a big winner off the top, canceling that. There's no doubt about that. But one of the things, Martin, that he also did was reduce the number of politicians at Queen's Park. There used to be 130 MPPs,
yep.
And I think he took it down to, 99 or something like that. And it was a great populist move, and everybody loved the fact that he was getting rid of politicians. With the benefit of hindsight, though, was that a good move?
Actually, that's on my list of good ideas. So don't ask me to criticize that one. I thought it was brilliant, and it always pains me when I see the number of MPPs or MPs, because we're tied to the federal distribution now, increase. We don't need more than 300 MPs in Ottawa, and we don't need more than 107 MPPs in Queen's Park as we had until recently. But the photo radar point that you and Chris talk about is an important one, because he was a populist politician, just like the guy who's in power now, Doug Ford. And photo radar was the quintessential, hey, I'm for the little man, and so on. And so it was a common sense revolution, not a revolution in the sense that we understand today in terms of civil rights movement or even backlash against police brutality today. It was a talk about tax fighters, the Tea Party, the American Revolution, and in some ways, common sense. cut government, we can do more with less. Never mind Walkerton, which I'm sure you want to talk about, or never mind nursing home inspections. We can do it. Just trust us.
Well, Christina, there was that famous quote from back in the day in which somebody said, "There won't be a single blade of grass on the south lawn at Queen's Park that fails to be trod upon by some protester by the time the revolution was over." I mean, Mike Harris came into power with the idea of getting stuff done, and it didn't seem like he particularly was concerned about who he'd have to bulldoze over in order to get that done. There was less social cohesion during his time than perhaps in years before. And my question for you was that a bad thing?
I think I think that Harris. I think some of the very difficult changes that Harris made were spun in a very different way than if say a socialist had tried to do it. He made some very difficult but much needed changes to the way education was funded. People were angry at him and said, "Oh, he's downloaded all these services onto the local taxpayers." But people forget that what he did was he also uploaded education funding to the province, which was a long overdue reform that needed to be made. Clearly, education should be paid for from the provincial taxes. Yes, there was not a blade of grass that was trampled, but I sometimes think that what they were trampled for were not the big changes, but some of the smaller things that just annoyed a certain segment of the population.
Well, Martin, let's talk about this issue about what was in the Common Sense Revolution document versus stuff that comes up. And you mentioned Walkerton a second ago. I think conventional wisdom says that for the things that Mike Harris campaigned on 25 years ago, which won him his first majority government, he pretty much did what he said he was going to do. But on the stuff that came up, tainted water in Walkerton, the shooting death of a protester at Ipperwash, how well did he do, in your view, at managing those kinds of crises?
Well, not well at all. And it's fair ball to do the greatest hits of Mike Harris. I'll throw in another one. He gave trustees a haircut by uploading that aspect of education funding. So every premier comes in with some coherent ideas. But Steve, you're quite right that the price that we paid for that, whether it was in changing the staffing ratios in nursing homes, Walkerton, when Chris talks about his pragmatism, you can talk about Doug Ford's pragmatism. You can talk about Kathleen's pragmatism. The question is, what's the balance between going with your gut? I'm in touch with the common man. I can understand whether you call me on the cell phone or tour the province before an election. I get it. The trade-off is that you're a kind of anti-elite in a way. And elites aren't always bad. Sometimes elites are actually people of scholarship and training, like medical doctors and public officers, medical officers of public health. And the problem with Mike Harris was that he didn't listen when he didn't want to listen. And so Walkerton and privatizing water supply, or I should say deregulating and so on, was the price he paid for thinking that he could do it better, cut red tape and things like that. I mean, look at Doug Ford today and red tape. He's bringing it back because he understands that you actually need to re-regulate and control nursing homes and other aspects of public and everyday life. So on Indigenous issues, for example, yeah, Mike Harris went with his gut, crack down hard. Let's move on this and not allow these kinds of protests and restore law and order. Law and order was a big part of the common sense so-called revolution. Increased funding for police forces. Well, that wouldn't sell very well today, would it?
Christina, can I get you to weigh in on this issue on the stuff he campaigned on in the Common Sense Revolution document? He had a pretty strong record, but it was on the other stuff that came up. How effectively did you think he managed those crises?
Yeah, I think that he did have some issue. I mean, well, Walkerton happened right after the 1999 election, and you kind of wonder how that would have played out if it had happened the year before. Although Walkerton had been a disaster waiting to happen for a long time, I covered the commission into what happened there, and there had been a number of missteps over probably 25 to 30 years, but it was the handling of it. That's what I think that that Harris struggled with at the time. Why didn't he go to Washington earlier when after that tragedy unfolded? And I think he hesitated and didn't go there. I think it was probably quite poorly handled. So probably not his finest hour, but it also, as the commission clearly outlined, this was not entirely the conservative government's on their dime kind of thing. It had been a long time in the making.
No, that's quite fair to say. You could not lay the whole thing at the feet of the conservative government. There was certainly there were plenty of cooks that made that stew go so bad. That's absolutely true to say. Martin, let me get your take on this. Which is a more accurate statement? Mike Harris loved Toronto or Mike Harris hated Toronto?
Well, privately, I think he loved Toronto because he still lives here. The man from North Bay has made his career here since leaving government and spent many years before being premier in Toronto. As a politician, as a leader, I don't know. I mean, amalgamation, I think it was something that I personally supported too. So did the Toronto Star. Put that on the greatest hits as well. But when we talk about, something that Chris and you mentioned earlier about the common sense revolution, think of it more as disruption, really, which is what we attached to Donald Trump and Doug Ford, was blow things up. Let's blow it up. And the problem with that, photo radar, fine. You can debate the fine points of that. Disruption isn't a long-term strategy. It's a short-term explosion. You have to build something up and replace it with something once you demolish it. And that's what Mike Harris wasn't so good at. He sold off the 407, right? And created this fire sale so he could, at a ridiculous price, so that he could reduce taxes and get closer to balancing the budget just before that 1999 election. We have been paying the price for the last 20 or so years and will for the next 60 or so years, having sold it off and lost many billions of dollars. So short-term disruption for long-term pain.
Well, having said that, Chris, I'll get you to weigh in on this. I'm not sure we want to push that, and I'm not saying Martin is, but we probably don't want to push that comparison between Donald Trump and Mike Harris too far. I mean, Mike Harris came into office 14 years an MPP, a former cabinet minister. I mean, he knew how to get stuff done. Donald Trump is, pretty different, just kind of disruptor, I'd say.
Oh, absolutely, totally. I was going to sort of leap in there because I think it's very interesting, and I think it's very important to note that Mike Harris was not in any way a social conservative. In fact, you'll remember after the 1993 federal election, when the Reform Party swept Western Canada and actually won a seat in Ontario, the Conservatives in this province were quite worried because fourth parties, they had lost probably 10 seats. They estimated 10 seats in the 1990 election to fourth parties, which tended to be on the right. So they really were worried about how to get that faction of the party, how to neutralize that. And it fell to actually Tony Clement, former provincial and federal cabinet minister, do that. He was the party president. But Mike Harris was not, abortion, gay rights were not on their agenda. It was not something they wanted to discuss. It was not something they did discuss. Harris made a point that and anytime he was asked about those kinds of issues, he dismissed them and said that he was interested only in the financial aspect of getting this province back on, the straight and narrow sort of thing.
Can I follow up with you on that, Chris? Because you're quite right. He disappointed a lot of social conservatives when he didn't move to criminalize abortion. When the courts decided that a bunch of Ontario statutes had to come in line with same-sex rights, he did it without a fuss or muss. Was he, in your view, politically right to disappoint those social conservatives?
I think so, absolutely. And I think that there's a very important lesson there for the Conservatives today, even in the federal campaign that we see going on, where there are two social conservatives who I believe are, perhaps poised to become, I don't know, kingmakers, whatever. we saw that, with the race that brought Doug Ford into the leadership. I think that in the recent times, the social conservatives seem to have gained more and more support. And I think that what Harris proved is that, or he showed quite clearly, is conservatives do best when they stick to fiscal conservatism. And I'm not sure I agreed with Martin's comment earlier that Harris couldn't get elected today. I think he could, because I think that he avoided a lot of the mistakes that some of the conservatives are making right now, and was very effective. As Jim Flaherty was the one, I believe, who brought in changed all those regulations that very quietly, very neatly, very smoothly. So I'm very ahead of their time in doing that as well.
Martin, I do need to ask you, because the Toronto Star, let's put it this way, Mike Harris was not their favorite premier. And they editorialized against him pretty much every day of the week. My question is, if he was such an awful premier, and I guess people on the left of the political spectrum have to have an answer for this, if he was such an awful premier and he did so many bad things, how did he manage to get reelected 4 years later with an even larger percentage of the total votes cast?
Well, as I warned you, I wasn't here. I was overseas for the Star at the time. And I think you say every day of the week, the one day of the week when the Star did support Harris was an amalgamation. It's a question I often ask myself. So that's why it's such a good question. I don't particularly have a great answer for that. I think it might have been the alternatives. Often people look at who is the lesser of two or three evils. And from what I've read, Dalton McGuinty wasn't ready for prime time, according to the Tory or conservative perennial slogan. And I think most people admit that. So people might have been looking around. But as I understand it, he was quite popular at the time. He had given people a nice tax cut and balanced the budget by selling off a highway that is called the 407. So again, short-term disruption, which was my point, was disruption is what he and Trump and Ford and Ronald Reagan, for that matter, share.
In our last 20 seconds here, Christina, where would you put him in terms of the history of Ontario premiers? How high up the list would you put him?
I think he's very important. I think he made a lot of very significant changes. I think he came in at a time when the province was having in very dire economic, as we talked about. There was no budget in 1995. If you'll remember, Bob Rae dropped the writ without even having a budget, and Harris and Eves had to come in, turn that around. They made some very significant changes to education. I don't think you can dismiss his importance in the history of Ontario politics. He was very significant.
Which is why we are talking about him 25 years to the day that he was sworn in as Ontario's 22nd Premier. Christina Blizzard and Martin Regg Cohn, it's always great to have you two on TVO. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Steve.
Temporary foreign workers who arrived in the province this spring to plant our fields and keep our agriculture sector strong have been hit hard by COVID-19. It's shone a light on that part of farming as never before. Mary Baxter covers the southwestern part of the province for Ontario Hubs, and she joins us now from London for an update. Welcome to the show, Mary.
Hi, Diane. It's good to be here.
Now, Premier Doug Ford announced earlier this week that Windsor Essex County, would join the rest of the province in Stage 2, except for Kingsville and Leamington. A lot of that has to do with migrant workers there working in farms and in greenhouses. What's going on there right now?
Well, there's been a number of outbreaks of COVID-19 in a lot of the migrant worker communities. We've seen it definitely in Essex County and in these two municipalities. We've also seen it in Norfolk County. And we're talking large numbers of people, in some cases well over 100 people getting sick with it. In Essex County, we've seen actually 2 workers die from COVID-19, another worker in Norfolk County as well.
I want to pick up on that. Your article for TVO.org highlighted one man's story who died of COVID-19 this month. He was only in Ontario for about 3 months. Can you tell us his story and about him?
Rogelio Munoz Santos was his name. Some accounts have his age when he died was 22. Others have it at 24. We know he's in his early 20s. He actually came to Canada on a tour as a tourist and was legally here as a tourist. It was not legal for him to work here, but he was recruited to work in Leamington, and lived in a house with nearly 30 other men. The house was just terrible in terms of it didn't have a proper kitchen facility. There were only a couple of toilets for all of the men to use. One of those toilets didn't work. The pay had all sorts of surprising deductions in terms of living and food and transport. The workers complained. They were moved to a local motel where he actually roomed with 3 other men, and there were just two double beds for them all in that room. Of the men, with all of these crowded circumstances, they all got sick. He got particularly sick. Their employers, which was the contractor temp agency, didn't tell them or convey to them any precautions they should take in terms of social distancing. They talked about COVID-19 as being just something that was, a mild seasonal sort of thing. These guys, when they got sick, they were out in the community. They visited a laundromat, for instance. They went to the drugstore. But when he got sicker and sicker, and another worker was also fairly ill, they went into the local hospital. The hospital kept Rogelio. The other worker was sent back to the motel. And then, as we know, Rogelio died soon after that.
I think one thing that your article highlighted, which was very important, I think a lot of people don't know, is farmers don't always have the responsibility for migrant workers, right?
That is right, surprisingly, but with a number of workers do come in quite legally within Canada. They have permits that they have to obtain. Those permits are often tied to a particular employer. What can happen, though, is that the worker leaves that place of employment because of persistent problems, and they want to find other work. When they do that, the terms of their permit are no longer in effect, and they become something that is known as undocumented. And then they can often fall prey to temporary agencies who then hire them, know their circumstances, and pay them inadequate wages, put them into terrible living conditions. But these agencies are also employing these people. They're the ones that are supposed to be responsible for them. And for others who might, like Rogelio did, come into Canada and who was not allowed to work here, but came in through another means.
Now, this situation has also highlighted the need for reform. What are advocacy agencies calling for?
They want to see some big reforms happen. One of the big things is that they want to see an open work permit be issued to all foreign workers who come into Canada. They would also like to see something like that immediately extended in a manner similar to what Portugal has done, so that even undocumented workers would be able to obtain that kind of permit and access to our healthcare system. The other big thing that they want to see is regulation, of course, of these agencies. Manitoba has such regulations in place. British Columbia has those regulations in place. Ontario does make it illegal for recruiters to charge a fee to people who want to come to Canada, but it doesn't regulate at this point in time. It doesn't regulate these agencies.
Mary, I want to thank you so much. Of course, a story the whole province will be watching in the Windsor-Essex County area. Thank you so much. That's Mary Baxter, our Southwestern Ontario Hub journalist. Thank you again.
Thanks, Jan. Great to be here.
And that is the agenda for Friday, June 26th, 2020. And a wrap on season 14 of the agenda. No doubt our most unusual season ever, given that 3.5 months of it came to you from my attic because of COVID-19. On Monday, you are in very good hands with Nam Kiwanuka, who will be hosting her 5th season of the agenda in the summer. And this looks like the start of a very bad joke, as in how many anchors does it take to sign off a broadcast? But hello, Nam Shine. You still at home?
Hey,
What's going on here?
Hey, Steve. It's interesting because as you've been in your attic, your hair has just been getting almost to my levels, but not quite. I noticed you got a haircut. It looks great.
I did finally get a haircut. It only took me 3.5. Well, I had to wait for Toronto to reopen, right? So it was almost 4 months before. And it was looking pretty bad, I know, pretty shaggy. Anyway, you've been rocking and rolling from your place, right? Getting ready for the summer?
Yes, and that's been interesting because I've been homeschooling with my 2 kids. So it's been a little bit challenging juggling everything. And I have to admit, when you hear stories about kids who are unruly in class, I had a realization that oh my gosh, that's my child. But no. I love my kid. But I really appreciate teachers because it's been a lot juggling everything. But with the magic of Stage 10, we've been able to stay on air, as you've said. And we've actually done some of the summer from here, a corner in my living room. And that's been really interesting.
Yeah, we should point out that you actually taped some of the summer stuff before the pandemic hit, and then I guess had to continue to tape some of the stuff from home after the pandemic hit. And how do you manage to get those young whippersnappers to be quiet long enough for you to do your thing?
My best friend, Nanny Netflix. I sound like a really bad mother. No, well, my husband is here, so we kind of juggle. If I'm taping, then they're with him in another room, and then we kind of trade off on that way. But we did some of the summer before the pandemic hit, and what we wanted to do, we did little updates. We spoke to some people afterwards just to get their perspectives because the world has changed so much. So we've done some from here, and then we're going back in studio in mid-July, so that will be fun to go back there and to see some of the crew.
Okay, cool. Tell me, I know they're all brilliant, but are there any interviews in particular that you want to bring to our attention tonight?
Oh, yeah. There's so many. I think one of the beauty about doing the agenda in the summer is that you get to read a lot of books. So many books come out throughout the year, and we don't really get a chance to. I think a lot of outlets, because they do 2 minutes to 3 minute segments, you might not really get into the subject matter. But with our show, we have the opportunity and the privilege of going more in depth. And for a lot of authors, COVID, especially when the books came out around springtime, when COVID hit, they weren't able to go on book tours. Their livelihood was really impacted. It's been really interesting to see people pivot and do online tours with Zoom and other online platforms. One of the books that I read that just kind of took my breath away was Hidden Valley Road by Robert Kolker. It's a story about a family in the U.S., 12 children, and 6 of those children had schizophrenia. And the way that he wrote this book, it's so beautiful. There is no judgment. When I was reading it, I was like, oh, there's so many villains in this. And then I had to kind of step back and say, there are no villains because it's a mental illness. And the way that he was able to tell the science of schizophrenia, what we still need to learn about these individuals, how they were impacted, the families, and also how the family contributed to scientists learning more about this illness. So I think that's the book that's just taken my breath away. But lots of really great things. We're also going to be talking about how cities have been impacted. I think about a city like Stratford. It's a city in Ontario that relies on festival tourists coming into their town. And now with COVID, that's not going to happen anymore. So what happens to the finances of that city? And I think with local politics, it might not be as sexy as federal politics, but local politics really impacts our day-to-day lives. And so throughout the summer, we're going to be talking to different mayors throughout the province, people, city planners, how cities are going to have to pivot, or some of the services that are going to be impacted. And I think we're going to feel this for a long time beyond the economics of it, but how cities function and maybe how cities are designed moving forward.
That's great. That sounds terrific, Nam. And as you know, I take off to a place that has no TV, but fortunately, your stuff is downloadable as a podcast, so I always catch it on podcast form. So good luck with it all, and I know it's going to be terrific.
Thanks so much, Steve. Get some rest, and we'll see you in September.
I'm going to have a nap for the next 2 straight months. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Nam. Take care, and we'll see you around. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm Nam Kiwanuka, and I'll see you on Monday.
There we go. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a safe and great summer, everybody. And guess who's going to be here Monday?
Me, Nam Shine. Have a great weekend.
So long.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. Ontario Hubs are made possible by the Barry and Laurie Green Family Charitable Trust and Goldie Feldman. And by viewers like you. Thank you.